Cubase has three different automation modes, and they can be programmed at the top of the Cubase project window right here where it says Touch. Now, Touch is the first default automation mode, but there are three other ones that you can choose by clicking the automation button and choosing Touch, Auto Latch, or Crossover. Now, these three modes will determine the behavior of your automation and are used more commonly with physical controllers. For example, a Steinberg CMC fader controller, which is called the FD, you can use its faders to record new automation data. But the behavior of those faders is affected greatly by the automation mode that you have selected in Cubase. And so to simulate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to change my display here a little bit. I'm going to hide the status line and info line, and then I'm going to reveal the automation lane for volume on the analog pad track. So I'm going to show the automation lane, and I've got this opened up fairly large so that we can see the automation data that controls the volume. And then to show you what a fader would be doing and how the fader relates to these three different automation modes, I'm going to go to my object inspector and call up the channel so that we can see how the channel relates to this automation data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the right automation control for volume. And then let's talk about the first automation mode, which is touch. Now, in the touch automation mode, it means that for the automation data to be recording, you're actually going to have to be touching the fader or control that you want to record new automation with. And so what I'm going to have you do is look at the fader and what's happening in the automation lane to see how touch automation works. Now, I'm going to solo the track and I'm going to start the playback on this project. So now, if I don't touch the fader, the original automation data is in control of the fader. But if I were to retouch the fader, now I've got the fader moving again, you'll notice that in the automation lane, new data is getting recorded until I lift off of the fader control. So now we have new automation that has been recorded, and anytime I lift off of the control, it's going to revert back to the original automation. Let me show that to you a little bit closer. I'm going to rewind and start the project again, and I'm still in touch automation mode. And if I wanted to just change a little bit about this fade, but keep the other fades happening, I could just lift off of the fader, and you'll notice that the original automation data was retained, and it took over as soon as I lifted off or stopped touching the fader. That's how touch automation works. You have to be touching and moving the fader or clicking on the fader for the automation to actually be recorded. As soon as you stop touching the fader, the original data takes over. Now let's talk about the second automation mode, which is Auto Latch. And in Auto Latch, the automation data gets recorded in a very different way. In Auto Latch mode, essentially what happens is that you don't have to be touching the fader after you've moved it the first time, because it's going to keep erasing the old data during playback. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the project and press play. And right now, if I don't touch the fader, the old automation lane is still in control of the fader. But as soon as I touch the fader and record something new, you'll notice that even though I've lifted off of the fader, that automation data is erasing the old data. So you can see that Auto Latch automation is very different. It's going to keep replacing the old data even if you lift off of the fader. Now, the third mode is crossover, and crossover is a little bit trickier to talk about. And to talk about it a little bit easier, I'm going to go back to our original fader automation by typing undo a couple of times. So now I have an area that has some up and down moves, and crossover mode determines what happens in between previously written automation data. So the crossover automation presumes that you're going to be touching the fader once to start the automation and a second time to finish off the edit. So for the crossover mode to be effective, you're going to need to touch the fader at least twice when you're recording the automation. I'm going to start the playback. The original automation data is going to be in control until I touch the fader, then lift off. Now as I move the fader over or crossing over the position of the original automation data, it's going to pick up where the old data left off. The crossover method essentially says that as soon as you make an edit that crosses over the old automation data, the old automation will take over. So that's a really cool way to make an adjustment to the automation without risking changing any of the older automation data after you've made your fader move. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you how to automate the master fader.